Family, the oldest social structure. Is it still the foundation of a healthy society? Do we even agree on what a family is? We're about to have a family argument right now. As family structures continue to change, we ask, what should the future of family be? In this episode of Doha Debates, we're joined by experts, global thinkers, each with their own take on this issue.
I think the future family should still be marriage-centered, because marriage is the most important part of this family.
Well-functioning societies celebrate difference. And so one thing that we can expect to emerge is lots of different types of family structures around the world.
We need to reintroduce a new version of the modern family that combines both the old and the new.
We do need to fundamentally redefine family, not by creating a new structure, but by going back to what worked for centuries.
Their perspectives will be explored and questioned in a Majlis-style debate, grounded in understanding and a search for truth. Now, watching over all of this will be a group of university students and recent graduates. They come from different universities in Qatar Foundation's Education City and beyond, and have been preparing for this debate.
You don't owe the world a family, you owe them community, you owe them compassion.
We also need to make the alternatives better for people who have to seek alternatives, who don't have any other choice.
There's people that don't have parents out there, or that their extended family is not competent enough to take care of them.
I think we should go beyond family and maybe speak about community.
You don't owe them a family, you don't owe them community, you don't owe anyone anything. You only owe it to yourself. What do you want to do?
After our guests finish their debate, the students will reflect and deliberate before returning with their own insights, ready to challenge, agree, or offer entirely new perspectives. I'm Imran Garda, and this is Doha Debates. Really good to have you all on the program. Looking forward to this. Family is one of those issues I try to stay out of the way as much as possible. It humbles me. Chika Ezeanya, when it comes to family, is it something that is a choice or an obligation?
Family is both a choice and an obligation, because when we are born, we don't choose, but we find ourselves depending on our birth circumstances in many cases. In families, and we have an obligation in that case to do what we are supposed to do as members of the family. At some point, we may have to choose also people we want to be family, but not in terms of discarding or walking away from relationship, but it's a question of probably placing levels on how close we are at some point during the course of our lifetime. So it can be both a choice.
That obligation, is it a moral one, a cultural one? What is it? Define that.
It's hard to define, but it's all encompassing in many instances. Yes.
Anybody want to chime in on that?
So, of course, nothing in life is universally good or bad. We have to deal with ambiguity and ambivalence. And of course, sometimes, for some people, families can be quite challenging. And if we have a narrative that we have an obligation to the family, that can actually maybe lead people to stay in family structures that might actively be harmful to them.
Exactly. Yes.
So is the answer then, it depends?
It depends.
I think it depends on where your family is and how the family is structured. In regions like the Middle East, in Africa and in Asia, even if you disagree, you can't leave.
And that's bad, so you're imprisoned. Yeah. Like, that's the point.
You'll always be stuck to that family structure that you were born into. So you choose to leave it, but you're still connected to it in an indirect way.
So I think we're talking about two families.
Yeah.
You have the family that you grew up with.
Yeah.
You got your parents, your grandparents. And then when you grow up, you have your own family. And that is the part you might have some choices.
Yeah.
And I think in the old days, and people get married and have kids, but now we see a decline of marriage rate. And so, a lot of people are not choosing that traditional route. I think that's probably what we're referring to.
I guess, let me then ask, in the modern world, what has changed?
I feel like the options that we have today are completely different than the old days when we were structured within, with your grandparents and how sometimes you are in a harmful situation and harmful family structures, but you don't see them till you're out of them. And I think I would always encourage students and children, like my own children, to leave the family nest. Go explore. But always know that you have a bound to back home, that you come back to a structure that's safe.
Wendy, what does the data say about family as those who share our DNA versus family that we choose that might not share our DNA?
So the family that we share our DNA and we're related by blood, in general, are stronger and they're doing better. In school, they have fewer behavior problems and they're more likely to succeed economically and then emotionally as well. So we do see, even though people have more choices these days, but if you look at the data, on average, in general, kids from the two married parents household are still doing better than the kids from the other type of families.
Is that the ideal in your eyes?
From the research perspective, we still call that the gold standard. That's the research we show, despite the fact that there's kids definitely grow up in a lot of different family settings these days. These days, people say, get a divorce, and then they get remarried, and they have stepchildren, and then step-parents. We have seen that even for that setting, like the relationship between their biological kids versus the step kids, they're different. I mean, the stronger ones are the ones with their biological parents.
Is family sacred? Is it something that is a sacred institution, Chika, or is it something that's a flexible, evolving social human contract?
I think we need to perhaps have conversations around what family means. And when we start looking at that, then we're looking at time spent together, stories told, perhaps as far back as 7 generations known, familiarity. And that is perhaps what is so difficult to recreate outside of the people that you grew up with. The sacredness lies in the weight of time, in the weight of information, in the weight of familiarity, of knowledge that comes with living with the same people who see your faults, who see your joy, who share the things about you that no one else knows. And when we really come down to that, we understand that family is sacred. It cannot be recreated flimsily.
But aren't we also sharing trauma, baggage, all of those other things as well?
That comes with it. And then that's where we also make room for the choice that we talk about, right? So at some point, if you consider your values to diverge so fundamentally from your biological family, yes, there might be need to step away a distance in order to recreate, try.
A lot of times you're pretending to abide and align with your parents' values when you're not.
But that's where the challenge lies. Are we really trying to recreate that?
I agree with you, Sundus.
It's a question.
Okay, she acknowledges it's a question.
For me, family is a feeling rather than blood or DNA. For me, family is this like being surrounded by love and care and being surrounded by people who share your values. And even if they don't share your values, they're still willing to tolerate them. They're still willing to support you.
I think family is chosen relationships or comfort relationships.
I do appreciate the fact that people are redefining the idea of family. And this is something that's completely fine, because if you ask me the definition of family, I'm not going to tell you it's just always going to be a father, a mother, and kids. So how do you redefine family, and what is important for you, and how do you build your moral compass? Like, because over here, you're the one making the choice of who is family. But normally, a lot of the people are just born into the family, so they build the moral compass based on what they are given. But over here, you're choosing the people, and after you choose the people, you start building the moral compass. This is something that's actually interesting to me.
I think it's a fundamental characteristic of evolving societies to have humility. And that humility does recognize ambivalence. It recognizes it depends. And you know, it's a very difficult challenge to kind of encourage and nurture institutions that are on average good for people, whilst at the same time accepting that there's variance and it isn't good for everybody all of the time. And that's where I think we should have our conversation, is at that sort of juxtaposition of where things are good on average but not good for everybody, and that's a really difficult challenge. And so to say that there's a one size, look, let me just say something that's fundamentally true. Well-functioning societies not only tolerate difference, they celebrate difference. If you imagine any characteristic, we would never have evolved to be where we are if we were all the same.
Does he make a good point?
So I want to hear what your thoughts about how harmful the family is, because you mentioned earlier, like, can you give examples?
Well, abusive families, families that intergenerationally transmit trauma. You know, we not everybody grows up in nice environments. Many people don't. We saw during the COVID restrictions, many people were asked to stay at home, where the households were the worst place for those kids to be spending time in, that schools were the front line of social services. And so that's the realities of the world. I mean, you know, we're not in a, you know, we're in a very lovely place here, but not everybody, of course, here as elsewhere comes from those nice, stable two parent families. So we need to be, rather than trying to shoehorn people into one way of living, which might work well for most of the people most of the time, doesn't, as I said, work for all of the people all of the time.
But on the other hand, I think you're talking about smaller group of people who because abusive family exists, but it's not the majority of the families. And also you're talking about COVID time. Actually, the data from US shows that because of COVID, people stuck at home, they spend more time with their kids. They're actually happier. And also, this is the interesting thing. Fathers actually spend more time with their kids and doing more housework and childcare in their house. So, which is the bright side of the story. I know, like, there's always two sides of the story. So there's a good news and a bad news part.
Absolutely. Of course, we would all agree that fathers playing an active role in their children's lives is fundamentally important to the kids in a whole range of ways, emotionally, intellectually. But whether that has to take place always and everywhere within a nuclear family, that's a very different question. And again, it's not going to work for everybody. And my concern is that the moment I hear anybody give a clear, definitive answer to anything, I think they're almost certainly wrong, because the world is messy, and we need to be doing more to understand that messiness and calibrate it in ways that don't have this one-size-fits-all approach to everything.
If we calibrate the messiness, what will be the aim? To leave it a mess, or to proffer solutions, which in this case we understand, as we have heard from Wendy, the gold standard remains stable families. Is there a way we could work with people who have come out of this mess to perhaps lovingly, respectfully find a way to redirect them towards what we know to be the gold standard?
Well, it's a super question. I mean, and I don't know that we have the answer. I mean, the gold standard, of course, insofar as you're calling it a gold standard, is that kids from two-parent households perform better. There's a two-parent privilege, as has been written about, is true within the context of a very powerful narrative that suggests that two parents work best. So it does, to some degree, become self-fulfilling. And then if you're then going to create environments that judge people very harshly if they're not in that model, then you're confounding some of that impact. So how we navigate that is super challenging. But they are the questions I think that we need to seek to answer.
Would the extended family be an important part in helping where it's a harmful situation or harmful household for kids to be raised in? Because this is, I think, what we're talking about when we talk about family structures. We're not just talking about the nuclear family, but also the extended family. And having lived in the UK for the past 8.5 years, I could see the difference, especially when COVID came. Yes, I agree with all these statistics that came up, but also all the loneliness came out, because even your chosen family was not part of your bubble anymore. So I think even the institutions and the structures and systems that we live in still have that mentality of your blood family is the main structure and the foundation.
Which I think it shouldn't be
Yeah, that's just wrong. Also, like, why do these panelists just like
And noting reaction from the students?
If we stop thinking of the community as our family, we lose a lot of kindness and compassion in society. It really does take a lot of people to help come together to achieve happiness, right? To achieve a sense of collective identity. And if we don't think of community as something that we're responsible for, I feel like we have a lot to lose.
I do think that idea of community and extended families, I think that's probably one thing we would all agree on is going to be a good support network for people. You're absolutely right about loneliness. I mean, I've made this point about celebrating difference. One thing where we are all the same is that we are all social animals, and we literally need social connection to survive in the same way as we need food and water. Unlike food and water, where you die if you don't get it, you quickly adapt and adjust to the lack of social contact, so that then you require less of it, but you get worse off. So physiologically and psychologically, loneliness is harmful. And we've known this throughout history. One of the most painful ways to punish people, solitary confinement. So it's absolutely true. Maybe if some of our conversations, not necessarily just ours, but ours in public policy spaces, started with that fundamental of the human condition, which is connectedness, then we would maybe move out into different ways that might extend into extended families, but could also extend elsewhere.
With all of that in mind, can stronger family ties be the answer to the loneliness epidemic? Is it a simple answer to a complicated modern question, Wendy?
Yes, I believe that's the answer because we're talking about relationships, we're talking about the ties. I think within the family, we have the strongest ties. And the relationship we build in the family is the strongest, it's the best predictor for a lot of well-being factors that we know from the research. I believe the fact is not that the family has lost its appeal. The fact is, today we're somehow had a harder time to reach that goal, had a harder time to build this relationship, to get married, to have the strong relationships. I think that's the part that we need to focus on. Not that family is bad, it's harder for us to get there.
To what do you attribute that difficult path, those speed bumps?
These days, young adults want to wait, they want to get their education, get a good job, and then they get married. And we call that the capstone marriage. So this is the last thing you do after you achieve a lot of status. But previously, people get married in their 20s, and it's a start of their life. So that's one difference. And also, again, women today are more likely to work, in the workplace. So there's less of a desire to get married because previously a lot of women marry for economic security. But now, if you work and you have your own job and you kind of have a less of the need for finding someone who support you economically.
Right. You have a success sequence. Lay it out for us so that we can talk about it, especially with the students later on, Wendy. What's the success sequence in your mind?
So the success sequence is a formula that we have to help young adults to succeed. In the US, it's very simple. First, you finish high school, and then you get a full-time job, and then you get married before having kids. So 3 steps. For young adults who completed these 3 steps, 97% of them are not in poverty. 90% of them are in the middle class. This is the US data. So it's a pretty strong formula to indicate that how important is education, work, and marriage to the personal success.
Imagine we never get a job. That means we'll never have kids. Imagine we never get a job. So
not necessarily.
That's the sequence. We will never have kids.
We're failures.
Yeah.
When I heard Dr. Wang reference a success sequence, my immediate thought was defense. I mean, there are so many things that people plan that don't happen according to that. And there are also so many different cultures and people who, they might not be able to get a good education. They might not be able to find a person to get married to. They might be forced into a marriage that's abusive. Like, the people have so many different scenarios, and these things aren't, necessarily exceptions. They are real. It's someone's reality. So it's not fair to say that you have to take these steps or you're not going to be like successful.
Okay, Paul?
You're defining success in economic terms?
Yes.
Interesting to look at success in terms of happiness and how people feel about their lives and their experiences in it. And that's where, and I think that's where you get some of the variation. I like that you stop at high school education, because university certainly isn't for everybody, and certainly doesn't make everybody happy. I mean, marriages, it is interesting though, just as an aside, if I may say, that whilst marriage rates have fallen, the desire to get married has been rather sticky.
Yes.
And that's an interesting observation, I think, that as we become progressive, or you might call it other things, over time, the kind of desire to get married has actually remained remarkably consistent and constant. So that's kind of interesting. But the marriage effects are themselves interesting. Of course, not all marriages end in success. There's a high rate of separation and divorce, and that's very harmful for people, particularly for their happiness and their economic well-being as well. And I do think the evidence suggests that a marriage is, interestingly, given the social narratives around marriage, clearly more beneficial for men than it is for women.
Yes.
It's more of a gamble for women than it is for men.
Always.
And if we look at divorce, of course, this may not be itself the answer to everything, but if you look at filing for divorce, it's normally coming from her rather than from him. And we can see in happiness data, you can see in the years before the divorce, she's getting less happy. So that old saying, a happy wife is a happy life, is actually probably true if you want to stay married as a man. But you are more likely to earn more money and live a bit longer if you're a man. The data are very mixed in terms of the impact of marriage on women. So, and some of the healthiest population subgroups, at least, are women who have never married and never had kids.
I don't know, I would disagree. I feel like it's a gamble on both.
There's a lot of studies that say that single women are happier.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Thinking about what Paul said, I think we resonated with him the most, just because I think we know that he's aware that certain marriage or certain family structures can be very beneficial, but he's very aware that a lot of times marriage or family can be very constraining, and he kind of was very aware that women can also suffer a lot in this very tight-knit role model family. So we really like that he was very open, like challenging things that a lot of times we took for granted, and we forgot that women might be suffering from those structures.
Should always caveat what they say is that we don't have randomized controlled trials, and it's impossible to say true causal inference. But some of the data are suggestive of the fact that if you look at limiting long-term illness, for example, in older women, you have lower rates of limiting long-term illness in women who have never married and never had kids. And some of the longest living population subgroups are women who have never married and never had kids.
Okay, discuss.
That's news to me.
That's news to me also.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where was the research based? Because most of the research that's done is always on, the white Caucasian. Whereas, looking at the global majority, there are, I'm assuming, more studies on that.
Yeah, that's a super point, because I think there's UK data, US data. It's an interesting. I mean, most of my data that I've looked at in terms of happiness, at least, comes from exactly those kinds of populations. So that again is a very important caveat.
So it limits the study in that sense.
Yeah.
Can I go back to your question? And when you're talking about women, not women, but in families and marriage, and after high school, what's the age range that you found of marriage? And going back to Paul's point, where it's about happiness, I feel is it when you're younger getting married, you're more prone to be happy because you've created somehow a bond with that person and a relationship, a long-term relationship. But when you get older and you marry after a PhD, which is 9 years in uni, you have more, more conditions of who the person you want to spend the remaining life with.
Yeah. So for the success sequence, there is no the age requirement for you to get married. And in terms of when to get married and whether that is related to marital happiness, good question. I don't think we have a definite answer. I think I've seen research showing that people who are religious and get married younger, and they're the happiest. And then their marriage lasts longer as well.
That's also how do you quantify happiness? And then if they are getting married younger, that's all they're conditioned to know.
And there's another motivator to you getting married.
College-educated people are less likely to get a divorce, so their marriage lasts longer.
Much less likely.
Research I've done in the past shows that college-educated women have an 80% of chance that their marriage lasts 20 plus years. So I want to go back to a few points you made about whether marriage is only good for one gender.
No, not only. I wasn't saying only.
Okay.
I'm saying it's much more of a gamble. The data suggests there's more of a risk involved in marriage for women than there is
Greater
for men.
investment for women.
First of all, we're talking about happiness part, and married mothers are actually the happiest among the groups of women when you look at women by their marital status and whether or not they have children. Married mothers are the happiest, and they're happier than the single childless women and married childless women and single mothers. And same thing goes with married fathers as well. So it's a similar impact. And also...
Sorry, can I ask a stupid question? The happiness index or whatever it is it self-reported or is it based on some other kind of...
Yeah, it's self-reported.
Okay.
The data we use
clarify.
is called the General Social Survey. So we ask people, you know, how do you feel these days? Are you very happy, somewhat happy, or not happy? So when you compare to married men versus married women, I don't see a difference in terms of their happiness overall. So women are likely to initiate divorce. That's a really interesting finding, and we don't really have much answers for that. And I think when it comes to divorce, you know, there's high conflict divorce, in which is a case that there's abuse, there's domestic violence, and in that case, you know, people get a divorce. But most of the divorces we see are low conflict divorce, meaning like, you know, it's just like people just kind of grow apart, and they're, you know, the wives are not happy with the husband not doing a lot of housework and helping with the kids, and so lack of communication. So these divorces, a lot of them can be avoided. Actually, research shows that 2/3 of the couples who stayed married instead of getting divorced, 2/3 of them actually become happier about their marriage.
Chika, a lot has been discussed. Bring us back to a center of gravity here.
We cannot look at the family without looking at the macro, the system that produces the family. And when we look at the rise of neoliberalism in the 70s and 80s, and the idea of humankind as an economic being, the emphasis on achievement, career growth, and on just being able to achieve what is seen as the idea of success by many. So we started to see children being raised without resilience for relationships. And if I am a successful medical doctor or a lawyer or an architect, then I think I am successful in life, and any other thing is a distraction. And that takes away the resilience to want to work on a relationship because, hey, everybody thinks I'm all that. So we see children not being nurtured to see relationship as critical and foundational in life, but just to go to school, get all those degrees, get wealthy, and you're good to go. Life is good. And what do we want these children to do when they become adults and can't function in relationship? That's what society tells them. That's what they've been raised to do.
So when Dr. Chika brought up neoliberalism, I think it was an excellent point, particularly in response to Dr. Wang's data, which, I'm not, disputing in any way. But, when it says things like people who are married and have all these other characteristics, whatever, are more likely to be rich, is it that we actually think that them doing that is what made them rich, or is it the fact that they have access to all this wealth and stability that made all of that possible?
Okay, in South Africa, the Zulu term Ubuntu, right? It's I am because we are. connected to family, right? I am because we are. Have we lost that in the modern world?
Again, it's Ubuntu is an African philosophy popularized by Bishop Desmond Tutu in his seminal work. And outside of Africa, we see that in other communities being practiced without being called Ubuntu. The West, of course, does not have that kind of worldview about life. And because the West is so technologically advanced, we see other societies, including Africa, copying Western way of thinking today, where we are gradually walking away from the importance of family relationships, extended family relationship, for instance. Parents who see children as their property to be flaunted, having raised a lawyer, a doctor, a successful person, and being cheered by the world. And this child is not able to build community because the child was not exposed to extended family, to relationship that tested this, the children while they were growing up, and that made them see human beings as human beings, to love and respect, to think of community. It's hard for the children to grow up into adults, to stay in relationships where they're not praised the way their parents praise them round the clock. And of course, if they're successful in their careers, then that's life. But then we see a rise in mental health problems with these children. It's a lot going on, and they don't understand why they are so successful and still so miserably unhappy.
I agree with you in terms of relationship being very important, and also in terms of the young people today are lacking the skills to have good relationships. Young people get a lot of education training and get a lot of work training, but they never get any training in relationships. And nobody get that. Like, especially if you come from a family that does not have a good role model, like your parents don't have a good marriage. And then, but where do you learn? Like, they don't know what a healthy relationship look like. So I think the education part is very important.
Can I say, I agree with everything that's been said about the relationship aspect, but it doesn't have to naturally be in a marriage. I mean, the point is, if I was asking someone about happiness that wasn't a happiness question, it would be something along the lines of, do you have someone you can talk to about stuff? Because that's a fundamental relational aspect, but it may or may not be within a marriage. You know, the likelihood of starting a charity or being pro-social comes sometimes from those people that never marry and have kids, because oftentimes marriage to kids does make people very insular and inward looking, and it is all about my kids and it's all about my family, whereas not having that allows people to look up and outwards a bit more.
And there are people that feel when they have kids, they are deprived of their dreams, or if they had kids early or whatever, then they feel they couldn't have done what they wanted to do.
True. So if we treat each other as family, I feel like we will be a more social society, we will be a more compassionate society and a more collective society like we were in the past. And I think that is what separated us from animals. I don't know if it's a bold statement to make, but we are here right now, not because of our intellect, in my opinion, but it is also because of our compassion for each other. I feel like we're leaving that behind altogether. And are we returning to not being human anymore? So I feel like a collective identity is what makes us human.
Just thinking of Abraham Maslow's theory of a hierarchy of need and how it's a pyramid. But his unpublished papers that were found, of course, after he passed, revealed that he had second thoughts about that theory, because he worked with the Blackfoot people in Canada, the Indigenous tribe in Canada, and he was able to understand that need is more cyclical than hierarchical. And that brings us to where we are saying physiological need and self-actualization need are actually intertwined. You can die physically from not eating, and that's what we see. But you also die emotionally when you don't connect, and that's what we see with young people.
So just for a little bit of clarification, so Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just give them to us again.
It's at the base, it's a pyramid. At the base, you have the physiological need, the food.
Right.
We have the safety need, the need to be secure. Right. You have the love need, the need to have love and emotional needs. Then you have the self-esteem need, and then at the peak is the self-actualization.
So near the end of his life, he questioned whether he was right.
Yes.
So maybe the emotional need would go down the bottom to the foundation.
It would be a cyclical, more than a pyramid, it would be cyclical.
And connect
where
a little bit to what Paul was talking about that need for connection and so on. I want to take a little pivot, talking about biology, gender wars here. Wendy, I'm going to ask you because there's been a lot of data that's come out. There's increasing divide in the way men view the world, socially, politically, and women. Men tend to either stay somewhat the same or veer right, and women are becoming more progressive, more liberal. What does that mean, Wendy?
I think that creates a problem because, if young men are drifting to the right, young women are drifting to the left, and it's hard for them to be together. And I see that as a potential problem for young people to get together, to form relationships. We're talking about relationships, and they have different opinions. But on the other hand, I feel like, marriage or relationship does not have to be based on your political opinion.
That's fishy.
This argument, because your political opinions are a reflection of your morals and your values.
The whole idea of opposites attract is not human beings. I'm pretty sure it's about magnets or like chemicals or something, because humans actually prefer people who are similar to them, not necessarily in every aspect, but there needs to be some sort of moral common ground.
It's interesting that on our beliefs, maybe about the family and other things, we're not that much more polarized. Some of the data says that we're not actually more polarized at all in our beliefs. We're more polarized in the hostility that we hold towards those who have different beliefs. And as soon as I notice a degree of difference between us, I then create a caricature of you as being the extreme version.
Wendy, how do you feel when somebody takes your data and uses it instrumentally to augment a position? For example, I don't know too much about it, but this trad wives thing, right? But they could use, the students reacted. They could use your data and say, you see, we need to be traditional families.
I can definitely see that because the data is there. It's supposed to be objective, but people can see that from different perspectives, then they can use it. Because I used to work for the Pew Research Center, so we only do facts. But even that, and we only do facts, no opinion, but people can cite the data the way they want it to use that as their evidence. In terms of the polarization, I do see that. I think the media play a big role in terms of how much it feeds to your opinion. And then you kind of have this bubble surrounding you, how much similar that you are with your social network, and we have fewer opportunity to know people outside of our network. Yes. I think that have a lot to play in this phenomena about polarization. Yeah.
Shareefa.
It's also the them and us perspective on everything that we do. So even now when we too say, the marriage is an institution, marriage can give you some happiness, can give you a strong foundation to go on and survive, financial, economic, and so on. You see the West pressuring on, why do you need to get married?
Chika, we spoke about, you mentioned, you charted the sort of beginning of the importation of neoliberalism, particularly into African contexts. Do you believe it's been wholly a negative thing in terms of the views of family injected into a more traditional African society?
Perhaps for the family, yes, we do see a rising case of parents trying to raise their children in ways that are very much Western in nature, because that is a way they see as being progressive, focusing conversations around education and career. And it is not either or. It's not either education or family. It's both and in a healthy way. But family and relationship connection being primary, because we are relationship beings at the end of the day. So that is the conversation that is lacking. How do we get the next generation, the younger generation, to see that life is really holistic in nature and not just about economic achievement. And that is one thing that we see not just in urban centers around across Africa and the global south. We see a rising urge to embrace Western child rearing practices that we know today through research is not what we should encourage at all.
So in a nutshell, as a sort of hors d'oeuvre to my discussion with the students over there, your advice to them on this issue of family and love and happiness and everything that proceeds from there, this concept of family, your advice to them is what?
My advice is to be human.
Be human.
Be human, and being human is about connection. Build connection with family, build connection with friends, close relationships, and at the same time, find your self-actualization within community. So if we focus on relationships, then if I want to be a medical doctor, that means I care so much about people's health that I see myself as that kind of person who will invest my emotions into making sure that that one person in front of me is giving the best treatment available, and nothing to do with the prestige of being a medical doctor or being better than anyone else. And that's really deep. That takes a lot of work if that's not cultivated within family situations. For a young person to cultivate that mindset will be take a lot of intentionality on the part of that person and self-examination and study to get to that place where they can
a lot of
become
personal and communal cultivation. Paul, what's your advice to them?
Well, if you're a man, say, will you marry me? If you're a woman, say, maybe not. No, that's only partly joking. It's about connection. I think that's it. I mean, you want to carry with you through life relationships that are important to you. And as I get older, as an older man, I'll just quickly say, my son asked me recently, we have a teenage son, what I regretted in life, which I thought was a tough question, because my initial reaction was nothing, of course, but there will be things. And I think, if anything, there's probably 2 or 3 friends in my life that I've lost contact with that in hindsight I wish I'd stayed in contact with. And I think that if you carry some people with you through your life, just by dint of knowing them for such a long time, they could be family, they could be friends, they could be people that you're at university with now. I think that's a good piece of advice.
That's beautiful. Shareefa, what's your advice to them?
Surround yourself with people that help you see the right and wrong. And that could be family, that could be friends. And stay true to yourself. Don't get influenced.
Okay, Wendy?
So I want young people to know that marriage is a great thing. It provides the strongest relationship, and don't be afraid. Go out and date and get married.
We're not afraid, we're okay. We're not afraid, we're okay.
That's been great. We've heard some great ideas here, some powerful ideas, and we've had a good dialogue here for quite a while. The time has flown. Now, beyond the arguments are lived experiences of closeness, of absence, of longing and love. And throughout this debate, our group of students, there's been sort of grappling with all of this. They've been listening carefully, listening to all your ideas, all your arguments. Now it's the next phase of this program. I'm going to go next door. I'm going to join them as they reflect and deliberate on what they've just heard. After their discussion with me, they'll return with me to share their own perspectives along with questions and challenges.
All of the speakers, when they were making a point, they always added like evidence and arguments behind it. I feel like even if the sentence that they started with could be controversial, I feel like when people jumped at it straight without hearing their argument, I felt like that was unfair, because the arguments that especially Ms. Chika was making, I feel like was grounded in evidence. So I don't believe in taking anything, even if I disagree with it, at face value. So I was really into it.
Some of the stuff that Shareefa said, she was incorporating a bit of culture, but she was still very open-minded about, okay, maybe this is my approach, but it might not be the best way for everybody. And I like that she gave a lot of, highlighted a lot about friendship, and that she was open about, okay, your friends can be family, which I liked a lot, and I resonated, and that made me more open-minded to her ideas as well.
Hello again, everybody.
Hello.
It does sound as if everybody's ready to get married now after that conversation. Sundus,
Yeah.
what resonated for you out there?
I would say that I agree with most of what Dr. Paul was saying.
Oh, interesting. Paul Dolan. Why?
I feel like he really brought in an intersectional point of view. And he was not very, how do I say? He was not very narrow in his opinion. He took in different perspectives, even if some people call them exceptions. I think he acknowledged that not everyone's life goes down a linear path and that it will always result in success. I really, really appreciated that.
So that it depends.
Yes.
Well, did that sort of resonate with a lot of you?
Yeah,
On
I
context?
think, you know, because when I was listening to what Dr. Wang was saying about sort of what kind of the ideal path to success is, right? I was thinking about it and I was thinking, well, that's probably something I would actually do. Like, I think I would follow that path in the future. But sort of what I didn't like was the idea that that is the way to personal happiness, that's sort of just like the ideal path, the gold standard, or whatever you want to call it, right?
Not to defend Dr. Wang, but I feel like what she's trying to say in today's society, that is the path to economic success, at least, right? No matter what, we as humans, I don't want to generalize, but there's this tendency for us to appreciate stability, and that is what a lot of family does. The problem is that even if we want to find this kind of stability, to find this kind of sense of community with our family, the problem is that we aren't able to. To give you a personal example, I come from Nepal, and there are entire villages in Nepal where there are no men, there are only women, because all of the men are out earning money in the Gulf or in Korea or in Australia. There are villages where there's all the elderly and only children, and of course, because the traditional role of men is being fulfilled by other demographics. So even though those people crave the traditional structure because of the way that the economy is structured, they simply cannot do that.
I come from an indigenous family in Nepal, and for us, literally, family is community, right? But what's happening right now is that all of the villages are disappearing. Like now, there's no kind of sense of community at all. And I feel like because of that, a lot of people in my community, at least, or me in particular, do feel this sense of helplessness and maybe even loneliness, because there's this kind of very important tie that binded us together. That's gone now.
I really appreciate the example you're giving, but when you say that, yes, in this society, in this economy, other ways are not working out, doesn't that just mean that it's the society's problem and it's not the person's problem? Because I feel like Dr. Wendy's sequence of success is blaming the person. Like, if you don't do these things, you won't get something out of it. So the system is telling us you have to do it this way, and there is no other way that you're going to get success. So it is the society's problem. It needs to accommodate other perspectives.
Yeah, I agree on that. I think family is not in a void. There are institutions out there who are regulating family. So why a certain model should be more successful or not, it's because the social institutions are made and think as family as that structure. All is framed because to respond to this family needs and this family structure. While in reality, life is messy, and even if you have a structure, people in their everyday life, they also go against it in their own way.
I have a different perspective, honestly. I feel like this debate has two different layers. One is when you're taking decisions to build a family, and the other one is connection with the current families that you have. And I feel like we need to differentiate whenever we're talking about it in terms of the context. And I feel like the success sequence that we're talking about is more about building a family and trying to attempt to build a family, right? And I do appreciate it, and I feel like it's valid to an extent, because I feel like the most important point about this is the idea of empowerment to women, actually, because the very end point is, if you want kids, do not have kids before marriage. For the safety of the woman, for the kid and the family, and the commitment of the man psychologically as well. Because I feel like men in the current day, they try to escape the idea of marriage, because we can see this trend even amongst celebrities, where they're just in relationships for years and years, and they have kids and they have the money, they have all the services, but still at the end of the day, they're not getting married. Why? What does the title of marriage has to do?
Can I intervene? The only issue that I have with Dr. Wendy Wang is that she's kind of enforcing gender roles that can be a bit toxic. So I think marriage can be helpful, but you don't need it, you know? Like, if you really love a person and you want to create a family, you don't need that, because like the government like assuring you that you're married, you know? So I think that's the only issue that I have with this.
I have
it
a
can have
question
benefits.
for you, if that's okay. So would you be okay if the roles were like swapped? Like, you're the one that's working and the man is the one taking care. Would that be okay with you? Or do you believe that there should be some sort of equality between both of them? That's number one. And number two, don't you believe that the government regulations to all of this is actually for more of like the protection of the woman? Because as you said, like the gender roles are more of, you know, the woman is normally the one depending on the man. So as soon as the man disappears, the woman does not have any sort of stability, any sort of system to depend on. And this is why, you know, these government regulations are important.
So for your first question, I would be totally okay with swapping. Not gonna lie, like I hate cleaning the cat litter boxes, and I am so happy when my boyfriend cleans it and cleans the dishes. Sometimes I do think that there should be like a balance. So maybe like I'm not gonna be working all day and then like forgetting about my children, right? I would come back and also be part of the nurturing process. For your second question, in reality, let's be honest, regulations don't really work when the government's here. One example is when a family gets divorced, right? There's a lot of dads or moms who do not pay to the other parent the amount of money needed to take care of that child. So even though the regulations are there, they're very flawed. I'm not saying let's not have any regulations. I'm saying that even without marriage, there's a lot of rights protecting the woman and the man as well, right? So I don't think marriage should be like the end goal.
If I could just interject for one moment, sorry, because it relates to the point that Hussein made. When you were talking about swapping roles, I hope you're considering the fact that while a man is providing, the woman is doing a lot of reproductive labor at home. So it's not this easy to say swap roles. She's doing a lot more roles. Like her jobs are way more multifold than the man's is. And this idea of providing can very much be the very thing that is weaponized against the woman. When you pull away those finances, of course, in the society that runs on economy and capital, she is going to struggle, but that marriage where it's the traditional roles ensures that. So I agree with Felicia, like these gender roles that like are being enforced by Dr. Wendy's like sequence and her idea are very
But is she enforcing it, or is she merely telling you guys?
If you want.
This is what the data's saying.
Actually, on the data, I actually would like to say something.
Okay, so wait, okay, Tamim's been wanting to come in. Tamim first, and then everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. This is why I agree with Sundus, and I see where Hussein's coming from, but I would have to push back a little on what you're saying. I believe the guests were actually gender neutral with a lot of the things they're saying, right? Maybe we're going into a different conversation of regulation. I truly believe children shouldn't be brought into this world unless they have that sort of protection. Like a lot of the problems we see in, you know, in developed countries even, is that these kids are being born out of like wedlock. So if a man decides, you know, he wants to cheat or leave, then women have nothing to fall back on. You know, you don't even have the government to hold that man accountable. So maybe we should be looking more into what the government could do to make it better.
I think there's this sentiment that's being developed both by the speakers and by us that just because you're unmarried or you have kids out of wedlock, then that's sort of like a death sentence. I don't think that's the case. Definitely not in the Nordic countries. Like if you look at Scandinavia, the percentage of children born out of wedlock is higher than 50%. You don't see Finns being destitute.
And Scandinavia is quite different.
True.
Thank you.
Contextually
True.
from most other countries.
Exactly.
Geographically, population, cultural homogeneity, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
Yes, just have to throw that out.
I do, and I do recognize that.
Right.
But it also has an extremely robust system of social welfare.
Right.
So I really want to shift the conversation away from personal responsibilities and that, but more towards, does the state have a role in supporting families or different types of families?
Thinking of family as, like, I don't know, an island of freedom. No, you are in a social structure, you are in a legal structure, you are in a medical structure, you are in social structure. Yeah, like you have the state, all these institutions which are involved in family, who decide what is family, what is not family. If you are a family, if you are married, you have the rights to this. You are not married, you cannot do that. I don't think it's, do we have to have family or not? Of course we need family. But what do we name a family, right? What is our definition of family? How we make a family equal?
My family has been amazing. I have, nothing to criticize, alhamdulillah. Like, I'm honestly very blessed. But the thing is, I have peers who, majority of the time, their at-home situation isn't positive. And so when I'm hearing statistics like 97%, and it's like, who are these people that you're meeting with such happy lives? Because I'm not, like, you know what I mean?
And also a lot of surveys that they're using and observations they're using, surveys, people lie. People lie. And then and that's the biggest kind of con when it comes to surveys, is that people lie. And not only that, but what you might consider happiness, I might not consider happiness.
For me, on a personal note, I had the privilege of my extended family like come in when I didn't understand things, when I didn't understand people, emotions. They stepped in to take care of me. They stepped in to take care of my health. I grew up as a very sick child. So I had my uncles and aunties taking care of me when no one was there, basically. And I would not be here if it was not for my extended family like stepping in. I would be someone else entirely, and I would not be an empath.
Also, following on your point, I think one of the issues I had with the women, like the speakers, was that they were putting such huge emphasis on blood, like on blood connections. So like they were saying like, oh, you will feel more connected to your family because they're your blood, or and I was like, no, like, and they were saying like, your family will always know you better, or you will trust your family more. I think they need to kind of like turn it around from just blood relations.
So I want to bring in Tayama for a second now, because to something that Chika Ezeanya mentioned a couple of times, and she and I explored the terrain of this idea of kind of Western neoliberal values coming into a particular culture. Tell me about that dynamic tension and whether there are trade-offs involved when it comes to issues of family.
For me personally, because my group in particular is more accommodating towards women, right? But for a lot of like traditional system all over the world, I think they can be inherently more oppressive towards women. And that's why I think going away from the traditional structure might be appealing. In South Asia, women, when they marry, they're supposed to go to the man's house. And because of that, women are relegated as this kind of burden towards their family. Not only are they not going to contribute to their original family house, but they're also a liability for them, because the women have to pay dowry to the men, right? So I can understand why people would want to move away from that. But to answer your question about the neoliberalism part, I feel like family, like the traditional family structure right now is not possible because of the like neoliberal economic structure that we have right now.
You want to change the system?
Yeah, I think we want to change the system.
If I could add to Tama's example, like what she's saying, it's the same thing. Like I'm from South Asia as well. So what happens is, in the end, like because women are going to these other houses, what ends up happening is a lot of times family will not invest in their education because it doesn't benefit them. Mm-hmm. They're going to another house, so they're going to take everything that they're going to be given to the other house. Kind of dehumanizes the woman to this product, and she has to be accepted into the other household, so that that burden can be offloaded from the parents, and then marriage becomes kind of a goal or like a point that they need to reach in their life, and if they don't, they're a failure, and that they would be a burden lying around their parents' house.
My upbringing has influences a lot how I want to live. I do appreciate families that are very close-knit. I like people who like community. But in my case, my mother died when I was 7, and my father passed away when I was 4. And I ended up being an orphan very early in life. And because my family is very fragmented, I ended up living with multiple aunts in different countries. And so I ended up leaving my family very early. When I was 17, decided to move to Mexico, made a lot of friends there, and then decided to come here.
I want to talk about loneliness, because loneliness has been spoken about in the context of, well, if you have a strong social structure, if you have a strong community, if you have a strong family, if you have these things, it's a cure for loneliness and selfishness and so on. And so, I mean, I know a lot of lonely, selfish, miserable people in marriages, in family structures with communities. So talk to me a little bit about this.
I think sometimes family can be more isolating than if you were alone, like just alone. I think like families, sometimes they make you feel more isolated in a family, in a traditional family structure as well. Sometimes if it's abusive, or if it's like sometimes you don't agree with them and these things, because you're supposed to agree with them, right? And you're supposed to grow up like them, and you're supposed to adjust according to them. So it's also very isolating, because you like sometimes you don't have your own experience. You're experiencing life for them.
So could you find meaning and connection beyond family?
If you just genuinely have an emotional connection with someone, if you can talk to people, you know, it might not even necessarily be romantic, right? It could just be having a really nice friend group. Because I would argue that deep emotional connection and then the need of having a romantic life, those are two separate needs.
I don't think it's necessary to combat loneliness, at least. I don't think it's necessary to have love or like to have marriage or to have like a family that's like that. But I don't want to dismiss it either, because one, for some people it is necessary. Two, for others, like, it can be beneficial, right? How can we ensure everyone has the best life possible? And I think that's the way we should frame it.
I think also, like, if you have a society which is fundamentally unequal, which is gendered, which is patriarchal, whatever the family structure is that we are speaking about, it will fundamentally be unequal, because you live in a society, in a structure, you have bias, which makes it unequal. It makes me think also the gendered aspect of the guest. I was thinking, is Professor Dolan that heard because he's a guy, so he's legitimate to criticize family? If it was a woman, it would be like, oh no, this is this poor woman who is not getting married, so she's just frustrated. She cannot be heard on this kind of topic.
The messenger being crucial to the message, how the message is perceived.
I was kind of thinking, like, the things that Dr. Wang was saying, particularly towards the end when her advice was go get married. I was just thinking in my head, well, you know, if that was like a 50-year-old male professor on there saying that, that would look pretty bad.
I appreciate the fact that she's saying, oh, get married first and then have kids, because this is something that is very important when it comes to like Western like regions of the world, where there is a lot of this whole concept of we can have a relationship that can go for like 10, 9, 8 years completely fine, and we can have kids in that relationship, but we're not getting into the point of marriage. And this is like a very interesting question mark.
There's this new sort of agenda on the horizon saying you have a responsibility to make babies, to get married sooner, and to do your duty to contribute to the gene pool. How do you guys feel about this?
Can I start?
Okay.
I've always asked.
Start.
I'm sorry. No, go for it. I've always asked my parents this question since I was a child. Like, why did you give birth to me? Maybe I wanted to be a duck. But like, besides the joke, we have to really think about why we're bringing people into the world. You shouldn't be bringing people into the world to have someone take care of you later on. You shouldn't be bringing people into the world to make sure that your lineage passes on or whatever, like, and your name lives on.
I disagree.
It's very selfish.
I'm
It's
sorry.
very selfish.
I'm not going to answer to the full thing.
Okay, how about everybody chimes in on this, but you go one at a time.
I understand that we are also in a society, right? We have to worry about each other. But if you come up to me, a woman who's going to give you that baby, and you say, you need to give me that baby because we need to save the world or whatever, I'm going to be like, hell no. Are you going to pop it out?
No.
I'm saying, like, I understand the necessity of having to, like, proceed, but you cannot force that onto a woman. Like, honestly.
You may feel like you have a responsibility to the world to produce a child, and that's fine. But you also have a responsibility to your child. And so if you're going to produce a child, which you wouldn't have otherwise if you didn't have this, like, ideology that I need to, like, pop out babies to save the world, then you're not going to raise a good child, and you're going to be a terrible parent.
That's 100%. So your problems are like with how, if I want to have a child, how I'm going to deal with it. This is an idea of parenting and how I am aware as a parent. It's not the idea of having kids.
If you want to have kids, have kids.
Okay, I think
it's very, because like if you try and limit this, it very much goes into like eugenics and like poor people can't have, shouldn't have kids.
I want to
like
attack, but I want Tamim to talk first.
Let's not have a slippery slope to, you know.
I don't think anyone was implying any of that.
Okay.
I think the conversation is shifting, right? Let's put a pause on saving the world for a moment and just go back to the question of when, you know, two parents, whether they adopt a child or not, they, I believe, not certainly entitled to have some of the love back when they grow up. Look, me personally, I don't believe in unconditional love. But I do believe when parents give their love, when they give the support, when they provide the education for their children, why should I not feel like I need to give that back to my parents? And I want to ask you, when you grow up, you feel like your children should, and if you decide to have children, should you feel like your children should have the right to ignore you? Even if you give them all that love, all that education, all that support.
You would hope that those morals would give them the mindset to be like the same as yours. So for me, like,
but obliging them is not love. I cannot obligate someone
no
to
one
love
said about forcing. You can't force anyone to do anything.
For me, like, I'm Palestinian. I'm a Muslim. We kind of have the same ideologies. Like, when my parents get older, I'm going to be their number one. I'm going to be there to help them 100%. But that's because they instilled those values in me. So if you are coming from somewhere where those values are not really, you know, expressed, or it's not something that anyone really talks about, or nobody really cares about it, then you kind of feel you have that choice. And at the end of the day, like, would you really want someone to take care of you that doesn't want to?
Can the state fulfill any of those obligations of family, love, care, and all of that? Can it in any way fill that vacuum?
The state is the backup institution, right?
Backup.
When family fails, the state is there, right? It's the idea. That's why, for example, that in many countries they require public education, right? You're not allowed to be homeschooled. And the reason for that is, I mean, you may disagree with the policy, but the reasoning for it is because it opens up the opportunity for abuse. If the family is doing a great job and they're fine, then the only thing the state needs to do is provide them an education.
When family as an institution fails, there has to be another institution that can step in. For me, the point of the state is to provide, a good living standard to its citizens, to do that to the best of its abilities. And obviously when it overreaches, it overreaches. But, the whole point is when something unfair happens, because life is unfair, when something unfair happens, there's a safety net.
Mikhail, you want to come?
I think that I wouldn't think that the state is the savior because it's at the image of the society, at the image of men, I would say. And it's classist. They step in poor families, okay, to fix them. When abuse happens in like big families, the state is not here. The institutions are not here.
Well,
they are
but the
meant
net
for
good
the
is
majority.
but that's the point of stuff like
Okay,
that.
Even the child protection.
Mikhail, make your point, and then I just want to ask a final question to all of you, but please make your point.
Yeah, the child protection is also biased. And for example, in Europe, it's targeting like brown families, non-white families, low-class families. There is also like a very cynical, I think, discourse about making children by the state and its institutions. When you don't let people come in your countries, and I especially speak about Europe, you let literally people die at your frontiers, and you are saying we don't have enough kids, you need to reproduce. People are dying to come here.
I just want to maybe choose 3 of you to ask you about your personal aspirations when it comes to this.
I see a lot more of my future to be surrounded by love and education. And like career, right? So my family, my nuclear family, my close relatives, I care for dearly, and I will continue to care for them. And even my extended family members that I am close to, I will continue to be close to them. And hopefully one day when I'm married, I can make my own family and have this kind of relationship. In an ideal world, I can focus on my career and have a family at the same time and love everybody and help people and be a humanitarian and all of these kind of things. But that's probably not going to happen.
Okay.
Okay.
Sundus, you want to go?
Well, why are all
no one wants to be the man.
None of the men want marriage at this point.
For me, when I think of family, what I aspire for is not something based on blood. First of all, it can be somebody who is blood related to me. But when I think of family, I think of people that I love, people that I share values with, morals with, and that I can rely on and depend on. That's it.
I agree.
Okay. I want a nuclear family, I want a wife, kids, and I want the connection with extended family. But I would also push those around me once they're ready to actually take this step as well. And the reason I see it as something that is important to also be connected to the extended family and actually to push for this sort of structure as soon as possible is the idea that we have identities. We have our own self-structure as well. And this is something that they also talked about, the idea of self-actualization and actually trying to understand yourself. And me having my kids, the younger I am, the more I have the energy to connect with them and be able to actually build a better moral compass with them. We actually share this household as a whole system, and then they will be able to understand how to build a system.
Perfect world if all men were like you.
Thank you.
My friendships are important to me in a social aspect in terms of having people there for me, but also to be there for people. I feel like I was put on this earth to help people. And I feel like a lot of the times, even if it's really tiny things, like I love to help my friends through like little breakups or like they had a bad day or, something even that we might consider minuscule in the grand scheme of things. I am a product of every person I've ever met.
If I'm going through a hard time, I have my friends. I have one of my best friends that we have been best friends for almost 10 years right now. So it's very easy to just call them, contact them about whatever. And the same thing with my mom, like me and my mom do not have any sort of boundaries when it comes to whatever talks we're talking about. So I can come to her and sometimes I'm like, hey, look, I know that there are traditions, but I'm talking to you as a friend right now.
So I think my friends were the ones who show me that I am important, I am a person that needs to be loved. And yeah, of course you fight with your friends too, they're different human beings, but fighting with them, like disagreeing with them, meeting their families, it's actually very insightful and it makes you happy. I feel like
even in my boyfriend's family, I found a family. Like, it's not only about my friends, but even their extent, like their families are also becoming my families. And I think that's kind of beautiful. I really love them.
I'm looking forward to you all engaging with our guests. Shall we go and meet them? Let's go. Follow me. As promised, I came with company.
You're back.
Yeah, they come with challenges.
Oh dear.
Questions, compliments also. Lots. Yeah. All right, here we are. I think before we get all of you to engage with each other, I think we sort of need a little bit of a sort of historical throat clearing, Paul, about how we got to family as it's defined in the factory settings these days.
Well, I think one of the things that academics are very fond of doing is talking outside of their areas of expertise. And that would feel very much outside of my area of expertise. One thing I could say is around marriage, perhaps, which is, of course, an institution that came into being around the time of the agricultural revolution, where we lived to sort of 35, 40 was old. And it's interesting, of course, we're now living to 80 plus. And whether we might want to revise and update some of our views around those institutions, given those massive increases in life expectancy.
Chika, I mean, the idea of the norms that were created today, how did we get here?
What we know is that marriage is an innate desire that has endured till today, which Paul talked about earlier when he said that even though marriage is declining, the desire to marry has not declined. So before we cast aspersions on 35,000 years of history, and before we mock what people have lived with and built over the years, let's step back and look at what happened during the Industrial Revolution. We look at the environment today, and we know there is a crisis because we can feel it. We can't dismiss that any longer. And I would dare to say that it is the same historical process that produced environmental crisis today that is as well produced the social crisis we have with the family. And instead of mocking what we have today or what we had previously, why do we want to do that with the family, with marriage? It has worked for years. It has preserved society. It has produced stability. So instead of throwing the baby away with the bathwater, we need to step back, just as we are stepping back with the environment and asking questions about where we went wrong and how we can correct the environmental crisis we face today. Where did we go wrong with family, and how do we correct the social crisis we face today with family?
With the world evolving, the family and the concept of family has evolved as well. We just need to adapt to it, take what is important to the individual themselves. We all have different values, we all have different aspirations, we all have different ways of thinking. It's just, what do we need to take from all of that's available in front of us to adopt it and adapt it to what we feel is the right way going forward.
Family is there from ancient times. Every society has family. Marriage is also universal. I think the big issue that we're talking about crisis is the fertility crisis, because in many developed countries and in a lot of developing countries as well, people are not having children. That is a crisis.
Okay, so is it? Sorry.
Well, can I just say? I mean, it depends. I mean, and this is an example of where some of our social policies, in particular, haven't kept up with the increase in life expectancies. When we introduced the old age pension in the UK in 1908, average life expectancy was around 50, and it was set at 70. You weren't expected to retire with your pension. We now have pension ages that are in their 60s still, and people are living to 90s. It makes the fertility crisis a problem because you've got a huge swathe of the people that need to be supported into their retirement. So you can't have a conversation about one thing in isolation.
One of the issues, one of the things that did elicit a lot of conversation when we were in the other room was whether it's this next generation's responsibility to fix the birth gap.
You know, when we talk about declining birth rates in places like, the UK or South Korea or wherever else it is, we're kind of forgetting that actually in most other parts of the world, the population is absolutely booming. I mean, we think about,
in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, that's where most of that increase is. That's where you'll see most of
sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, parts of Latin America, the population's doing just fine. There's no decline.
But
Countries
if you sorry to interrupt, but if you compare the same country like 30 years ago to their current fertility rate, I think the trend is going down, even for those countries.
The reality is that in countries like South Korea and Japan, for example, with really low birth rates, they also have really xenophobic immigration policies that make it actually really hard for them to kind of, jumpstart population growth.
Just to add real quickly to Dr. Wang's point, as you said, in comparison to 30 years ago, but within your success sequence, you mentioned education as a priority. As more people get an education, they are considering planning families and Planned Parenthood. And with that, you have people more responsibly deciding not to have 10 children, for example.
So may I add something? I understand the data, and I think it's very important to obviously see the numbers, right?
Yeah.
But I was thinking, we were talking about in a group, like, I think happiness is very subjective, so it's very hard to quantify what makes somebody happy. So don't you think it might be a bit difficult to see, like what's happiness in that sense, right? Like, can it be subjective?
Of course, if you're going to collect data from people about their happiness, especially about two-parent households and societies that want people to be two-parent households, societies that want to be family-oriented, they are going to be happier because they're being taken care of. And if we're going to collect data in the same society from people who don't have two-parent households, they're going to be miserable because people are making sure that they're miserable. And I come from a two-parent household, and I am happy, but I'm not shy to acknowledge and recognize that that's not true for a lot of people. And I'm not shy to recognize that the society is built in a way that has helped my parents bring us up.
You can't ever look at any of this evidence free of context and free of social pressures and free of judgments and free of the way that people are expected to live their lives. You can never do that. So a really interesting question would be, what would the world look like if we could free ourselves of those kinds of constraints? I think that's a really fundamentally important question. But it is true that there is a two-parent premium. That's well established. So why don't we focus much more of our attention on the impact that parents, whether married or otherwise, are having on their children and their child's outcomes? That would be something that we could all presumably agree on. Okay. That places it in the context of a family, places it in the context of an extended family, places it in the context of wider community, places us in the context of moving away to some large degree from the focus on ourselves.
I want to get Chika Ezeanya to react, respond, and then I want to open the floor on this side because we haven't heard much from this side. So, Dr. Chika.
Yeah, I guess I have more of a question. How did we get to having to legislate on emotions? How did we get to having to ask and demand people to get married and have children? It's supposed to be a thing of joy and excitement and what we do, what happened. And we need to get to the root of what happened in order to understand how to respond as emotional beings.
So what do you think happened?
We had mentioned that earlier about the fact that we reframed human beings as economic beings.
Yes.
It became about your paycheck, it became about your net worth, about your status, about how early you leave in the morning and get home in the evening and are shared by your peers, and less about connection, about the joy I get at seeing another human being born into this world, and or a friend or my mom or my grandma, and spend time and just be human.
Chika, I want to ask you about whether the suffering of the most downtrodden is a separate argument, and if our view of family applies to them, is it the same affliction or is it something different? Let's just take the analogy of if we're a human body, say we're one family, the rest of us are suffering from some sort of fever related to family right now. We're trying to figure it out. How does that apply to them, or is that something completely different?
Well, I understand looking at the suffering, which we should not by any fraction undermine or look down on. But I also question our propensity to jump into the negative and ignore all the positive that is out there that we need to explore and embrace. We are quick to point at the things that are not working, the one or two instances which are gravely disturbing. But if we do not draw strength from the positive things that are working, how do we expect to address the negatives?
I am planning to, inshallah, one day be a therapist. I want to help the children in Gaza. There's a sense of family. There's a sense of obligation when it comes to displaced people, when it comes to genocide, occupied people. We need to do everything that we can to use our resource to help them. When we were talking about family, I feel like that sense of community, I want to be that stranger that people can lean on. I want to be their family.
So could I ask you specifically, you worked in Rwanda, yes?
Yes, I did.
Tell me about that experience and tell me about being able to see the positive in that light.
Rwanda used a traditional restorative justice mechanism called gacaca, rehabilitating offenders, saying that we don't want to send you to jail or kill you. We want to humanize you, because it's not just about you, it's about the next generation and the next generations to come. We want our children to see humanity in adults because they need to believe in the goodness of humans so they can want to have children. They can see the world as beautiful and peaceful and joyful. And that's how Rwanda used gacaca to try to restore and rehabilitate as many offenders as possible. And that's something that indigenous communities have, which is restorative, restoring the human person to their core humanity, which we believe is fundamentally good. And except we get back to that emotion, that connection we have, and we keep referring to the negativity that the media wants us to believe is all there is to life, nobody here will want to have a child.
I want to go to the side of the panel.
I have a question. So Dr. Chika, I really appreciate how you highlight this tension between neoliberalism and the neoliberal economy today that prioritizes individual gain and mobility over like traditional system such as Ubuntu that appreciates collectiveness, right? But I feel like in today's world, we don't really have a choice to choose between them. I feel like the economic pressure is too strong, and I feel like it's winning over this kind of collective value that indigenous system and tradition have. So what can we as a community do, or like how do we navigate that as a community to get to a point where we believe in having children, we believe in having our futures?
Thank you. That's a great question, and I hear students ask that question a lot. We need to go back and study traditional societies. We can't run away from that, really. It's if there's something that has worked in the past, and not everything in the past worked, but if there's something that has worked, that has kept people sane and happy and connected and excited to be alive and excited to have children and have families. Depression cases are rising all the time, mental health issues among young people. My students are taking time off all the time because they can't just seem to, there's just this vacuum that nothing can fill. Right. So young people are so burdened by what is going on around the world. They see this is as if the world is all bad and evil. And who wants to bring a child into the world that has been described wrongly as being what it's not? So we need to get back to what the world really is. It's hard to wrap our minds around it, but that exists. That truth exists. Indigenous people can help us retrace our steps and find out how we can redraw our compass to get back to being human, one person at a time, one community at a time.
Paul, you want to come in? Just one second. Paul.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a super question. So it's clearly a collective action problem. It's not something that any individual can swim against the tide on their own. And so recasting what success looks like is clearly going to be part of it. It's very interesting we have this term social mobility. We don't actually mean that at all. We mean economic mobility. We don't mean social. There's nothing social about it. It's about getting better and higher paying jobs. That's actually what it's about. So if we recast social mobility to be truly social, which makes it relational as well as economic, and if we change our incentives, the things that we celebrate, the things that we post about, the things that we rank people about, given that we are driven by status, that's part of, we care about reputation. So we need to recast some of what we measure as being reputationally good to be broader and to absolutely fundamentally include, which I think we must all agree on everywhere around here, the relational aspect.
Yes, relationship is important, but you get the strongest relationship in marriage. So we have seen in the past 20 years also a decline of happiness in the US. I don't know about the data in other countries. And The Economist has done the research showing that the decline of marriage is the biggest factor in this decline.
But it was interesting you said you get. You see, that's not, you don't know whether I get. That's the point. The point is the variation that we observe. 40% of marriages end in divorce in the US, right? So you then have to account for the losses that come from separation and divorce. If you want to maximize happiness, it has to be over the course of a lifetime, not at any one moment in time. So these what make the data much more interesting and more nuanced than bold claims and statements about how the one-size-fits-all approach works for everybody.
I was very intrigued by his whole "it depends" mindset, because that's literally my entire mindset. Because there are so many different things happening around the world and so many different factors that we can't say, like, it's not one size fits all.
Like, if you look at the US right now, about 40% of children are born out of wedlock. So think of, like, if you're pushing this narrative that, you must be in a nuclear family, you must have two parents and all of that. So are you essentially telling the child that they are not worthy, that they are inadequate in some way?
Can I just go back to the 40% number? Yes, so 40% of the babies born in the US are to single parents, but that's the problem. So it's not like we're accepting the fact, and actually a lot of social problems in the US are driven by the family breakdowns.
So the question was that those 40%, aren't you essentially telling them you're not worthy, you're born to a single parent, like by pushing this narrative, right?
That's not what we're trying to say. I think the children are innocent. You cannot choose which family you're born into.
Absolutely.
Yes, but you can choose your own path. I'm not saying everybody, there are definitely single parents are quite successful, but on average, and it's, children coming from a single parent family are not doing as well compared to the other children.
We can put the children front and centre, and I agree that parents need to step up, and we need to create a much more powerful social narrative around both parents being in the child's lives. But if you're going to say that that has to only exist within marriage, then for all those couples for which marriage is not going to work, you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
I appreciate the fact that you're saying that there are some couples that do not want marriage, right? And this is a trend that we see nowadays. It's not even based on like the financial aspect. There are people that have the money, they have the services, they have the luxury of comfortably having the sort of life where they are married, but they still choose to have relationships and kids. And I want to understand, why is the term marriage became something that is like so threatening, and there are so many responsibilities that they would choose to be in relationships for years and years, but not choose to take the other step of marriage?
I don't doubt, I've never doubted that for significantly large numbers of people being married and having children, this isn't an either-or debate. It's what social narratives we construct and the judgments we form about the lives of those that typically aren't conforming with what's expected of them. That's really where the nub of it lies for me. I mean, it clearly lies in different places for other people, is that it seems to me to be entirely possible that we can construct a world in which people make these choices in a way that is beneficial both to individual and to children, if we have them, and to wider society, given the pro-social behaviours that we might engage in, and that we can celebrate, not just tolerate, but celebrate that diversity. That's really where, well, that sounds like a utopian vision, but I don't think it's an impossible one, where family relationships, caring for children, nurturing relationships with friends, maybe sometimes intimate, maybe sometimes married, form a really core and central part of that.
Let people make the families that they want to make. Let people live life the way that they want to live, and let people not make families. Some people want to live alone. Let them live alone. Like, why is somebody pushing a secret recipe down my throat? Like, I don't need you to tell me the secret recipe. I'm fine. We're good. As long as like you can back off and let people live their lives the way that they want to. And by that, I don't just mean like you do you, actually accommodate and make space.
So to become a family nowadays, it costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of money, and some people don't have, enough to get married or to have a child or to take care of themselves even, let alone to take care of somebody else. So it's a little confusing to me when we mention this success sequence and we say that you need to have an education, then get married, and then have kids, when the women are deciding to prolong having a family or prolong getting married for the sake of their education and or career, and then we're like, well, why aren't you guys getting married?
Mikhail, from our conversation in the other studio, you mentioned that you don't want to start a family?
Maybe we could share parenting among the community. It's not my child, it's our child, you know, could take care of each other. Of course, it would mean changing the institution to reframe family in another understanding. And we know that there is so many ways of making kinship, right? Through food, milk kinship, even in the Middle East, right? The milk kinship. So I think there is so many ways of making parenting and making family, and we are restricting our debate to like a blood family.
What he's saying, by the way, is something that I think is actually starting to pick up steam. So if you look at Cuba, for example, Cuba had a referendum a few years ago to change its constitution. They decided to first redefine marriage as simply a union between two people, but then also declared that marriage is one of the bedrocks of one of the forms of family, and did not describe it as the bedrock of family, period.
I don't think that having different types of family is a solution, because we have seen in the US, there are all different kinds of family out there. But if you do a study to look at the well-being, child well-being, to look at the well-being of adults, and we still see the married two-parent family is a gold standard.
So when you have a cookie-cutter model and you want to impose it to the world, you are deconstructing other structures that you don't understand because you didn't make the step to go to open, to hear them, to listen to them. Very important to listen to them, not only hear them, and to understand the way they live, their society, their environment, the structure, and then navigate it in their own way. I think it's also super important to acknowledge that marginalized people and some other communities always played in the system, being like, oh, there was an essentialist family structure in the past which worked for everyone. No, there have always been people in the margins which had like other ways of living, but they were not given a platform to talk.
I'm just thinking, what about those people who don't have the opportunity to live in that traditional family? Why are we creating such a set standard, a gold standard? I don't think it's someone should have...
Okay, so the gold standard, is it one of those all things being equal rather than including the exceptions?
I mean, I definitely we allow exceptions. And in a war zone, I mean, I think the first thing you worry is about your life. It's not about getting married, I'm sure. But we're talking about the ideal. We always want to know what's best. What's best for children, what's best for your own happiness. And we have found out is the family, it's the marriage and family.
Okay, so I want to go to the students and I want to ask them, however they define that ideal family, what's stopping you, what's preventing you from achieving that right now?
I'm trying to find someone who shares the same values and morals. And going back to what I said about society, I feel like people have been taught to expect women to be a certain way. So I'm struggling to find someone who doesn't want me to mold into that. And then, like, similar to Sarah, also, like, I also have a lot of health issues, so I don't know how you reconcile that with the standard family that people expect women to build.
Understood. Thanks for sharing. Tamim, what's standing in the way of your ideal scenario?
Number one, like you said, like the society around us needs to change to have less stigma of the choices people might take. I do think the idea of a nuclear family is wonderful. I might, at this moment, don't think it works for me as of now, but I still strongly believe, especially as a Palestinian, that, you know, family is resistance. And you know, when we talk about Gaza, I had the honor of working from people from Gaza who evacuated as a volunteer with Qatar Foundation. And you'd be surprised, back to your point, Dr. Chico, they have a lot of joy in their family and they see a lot of the positive.
Okay, Mudassa.
I mean, you kind of touched on this earlier as well, on like your aspirations of a family. I don't think I have that many aspirations of what my family would look like. Sure, like it could look like a nuclear family.
Gonna roll the dice?
Listen, like life is a game of chance. Like why not let it happen? You know.
Okay, fair enough.
But do you want to get married?
Eventually, probably. But again, even if I don't, it's not a big deal. You know. Like,
he just does one of those. Yeah. Felicia.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think there's anything standing in my way. I'm very, I'm very confident that what I want to do. I have chosen my family, which are my friends, and I have an amazing boyfriend that really loves me. So I really don't think there's anything that's stopping me. Whatever, I might get married, I will not have children, and that makes me happy. And regardless of what people say is the best, I will follow whatever makes me happy. So I don't think I have anything in my way.
Respect. Amir?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, actually, I will be following the sequence to success. I'm going. My plan is to pursue an education and go into postgrad and then get married afterward. But yeah, the only thing stopping me being the fact that I'm 18 and have quite a few years to go before I've completed that.
So you were just debating Wendy for sport, it seems. Okay. Tayama, what's standing in your way?
For me, family is my community. So traditionally what would happen is my whole village would be my family, but the modern circumstances is different, because it's making all the villagers scattered, like we're all over the world. So like when I meet someone from my community, they know my family name and they feel this connection to me, but I feel like I don't feel any connection to them. So I feel like my tie with my community, with my family is being thinner and thinner every single day. So I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm kind of lost. So I also think I will also be following Amir and having this following this neoliberal model of success in life.
Hussein.
So number one, my mom.
Oi.
No, but seriously.
Number two, my mum.
But honestly speaking, like I feel like the major thing that's stopping me is the idea of, again, like the social perspective of how we have it here in the Middle East. Like, oh, you need to have this specific amount of money, the wedding needs to be this big, the houses need to be this big, the cars need to be this much. I'm like, okay, so by 50 years, I might come back and like propose again. maybe during that time I'll be available, I'll have all of these things. So I feel like there is a huge financial aspect in terms of the constraints that we face and the social aspects as well. But other than that, as soon as I'm ready, I think it will be okay, as soon as my mom approves as well.
Mika?
Continuing to build my community, I would say, and once I feel fulfilled with the community I have, finding a way to bring us together in a place, trying to go beyond institutions, and also I think it will be so creative. So building our own things and go beyond what we imagine.
Right. Nada?
I agree. I agree that it's about community, and I think that I have a community that I would call family, but they're being genocided in Gaza right now. So the only thing standing in my way is the freedom of Palestine, because as soon as that happens, I'm like almost 100% certain as soon as Palestine is free, we are all going back. That is our family, and so long as they're unhappy, I will not find happiness.
Absolutely.
Sarah?
I don't think anything stands in my way except maybe health insurance. I think if that's out of the way, then maybe being able to create a community. So I already have a community. All the NGOs I worked with, I think they're all my families. We're all a big family. No matter what happens, I know that they know that I'm here. No matter how many wars happen, no matter what happens, I'm here at the other side of the world, and I know they're there. So I think that's my little small Gen Z family.
Well, it's really nice of you all to sort of crack yourselves open a little bit and open up to us, and we really appreciate it.
No matter what definition of family we have, may it be friends, may it be people we align with, may it be blood ties, we all want a family. But I feel like in the current day society, it does not allow all of us to attain what this family we crave is, right? And to say that to fix the ills of society, just get a family, when we cannot get a family because of the ills of society, I feel like that's a wrong place to start.
Before I get final thoughts from the guests more broadly, I just want to ask if they have any specific advice for any individuals or sort of more generically after what you've just heard here. Let's start with you, Paul.
No.
No advice?
No,
I mean, my advice to them is that you never figure anything out when you get older.
Thank you. No, but I was going to say this in my summary, but let me say it now. We've got 2 teenage children, right? So what kind of advice am I offering them other than to do what I tell them? Which of course they rarely do. Whether they marry, whether they have children, is for them to work out for themselves. There is absolutely no advice that we would give them about how they should live their lives. But as long as they have connection, as long as they have someone they can talk to about stuff, then they'll probably be all right. So that's my advice. Have someone you can talk to about stuff.
Wendy?
I would say prioritize relationship in your 20s. And so that, be open to friendships that could turn into marriage. And I think, marriage is a great thing. Embrace it.
Okay, Shareefa?
understand what you want. Don't compromise too much. And communication is key. Tell them everything that you want, everything that's on your mind, because that's the only way you can enter this, institution, if it's a marriage or if it's a relationship.
Chika?
I'll just like to have us again conduct a lot of introspection as far as who we are, because who we are will be who will bring into a relationship. And when you are consumed with giving of yourself, really you have little time to consider how much you're getting back in return, because it just flows naturally back to you. So building community for the sake of giving of ourselves is important, much more than what we can get out of our relationships.
And a final spin of the wheel here. Paul, what have you taken out of this conversation with the students?
It's been absolutely wonderful to hear from everybody, which is why I when you asked my question, what advice would I give? I said no, because I've long been interested in why we care so much about how other people live. When if we just get on living our authentic lives ourselves, cohesively, knock yourself out. Do what you want. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Wendy, what did you take out of this?
People want to be happy. So if we know what's the secret of happiness, we should tell them. We should not hide it.
Okay, Shareefa?
Well, I think you're not far from where we were when we first thought about marriage. It's the same issues, the same questions that we had, the same challenges. It's just the choices that we made that made the difference.
Chika?
It takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It takes a village. If you were not raised by a village, then something happened along the line. But you can build your village, and it will be a joy raising a family with a village.
Thank you all. That does bring us to the end of this episode of Doha Debates. I thank you to our speakers, our students, and all of you for watching and listening. As always, we've explored bold ideas, we have challenged assumptions, and I hope we have opened up space for understanding each other with respect and curiosity at the center. But, of course, the conversation does not end here. Now, it's your turn. What do you think? You can share your thoughts, your questions, and your perspectives. We are listening. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Honestly, to me, family is very, very important. It's like something that I noticed today. A lot of people would see that, oh, there's always a negative perspective to families. What about abusive families? What about hurtful families? This is something that I completely understand, and this is why I have the general statement of families build your moral compass at the end of the day. Whether it's a healthy family, whether it's a bad family, you understand what's good and bad, and this is how you can actually move in and develop in life.
When you come from a family-oriented society where if you belong to a two-parent household, it's easy to have the luxury of beliefs. But I've had the privilege and the honor of knowing people who come from so-called broken families, and they've taught me what it is to be tolerant. They've opened my eyes to how you can have a different sort of life. So if it wasn't for those people, I can very well see myself not having these ideas.